Welcome to the Story Learning Podcast, regular doses of language learning tips and motivation to help you become fluent in any language. With me, Olly Richards. For language programs, books, free resources, and much more, visit StoryLearning.com. Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the I Will Teach You a Language podcast. Great to have you here. Today, I think what we're going to do is dive straight into the question because I went off on a long ramble in the last episode all about speaking. So that's quite enough of me. Let's get into today's question from Ron.
What's up, Olly? This is Ron from the US. I had a question about time in the car. I'm going to be moving and I'm going to be commuting an hour to and from work in the car a couple days a week. And I'm switching to a new language, so I'm still at somewhat of a beginner stage. I've tried doing audiobooks in the car, and because I don't understand the majority of what I'm listening to at this point, it's hard for me to keep my attention focused on it, so I'll end up having to repeat things many times. Do you have any tips of how to use time in the car to study that's hands-free? Just curious. Thanks so much.
Hey, Ron, thanks for a great question. One that I think will be relevant to quite a lot of people out there. So I've always found it a little bit difficult to learn languages in the car because you're never totally concentrating. All right. If you're not driving, that's a different story because you can just kind of, you can pay a lot of attention. But, your hands are on the wheel. You're focused on what's in front of you on the road. And so, obviously, I should probably actually give a disclaimer here saying that whatever you do, make sure you drive safely, Ron. I do actually believe that, obviously, but I should probably say it for legal protection. Drive safely, everybody. But of course, when you are driving safely, you don't have your full attention on anything that you're listening to. And listening is the only thing that you can do realistically in the car. I think if you're at a higher level in the language, then you can listen to audiobooks and podcasts. And even if you don't understand everything, it's still quite useful, right? But if you're a beginner, then, remember, the number one rule of listening is to listen to material that is within your range of comprehensibility. All right, there's no point listening to stuff that's way above your level. You want to listen to stuff that's only slightly above your level. All right, so based on this principle, as a beginner, Ron, I would agree that listening to audiobooks and podcasts and stuff is a kind of not very good use of the time. It's obviously still better than nothing, and if the choice is between listening to English radio and Spanish radio or whatever it is that you're learning, then obviously choose the radio in the foreign language because your ear will at least pick up on the sounds of the language and so on. But what I would recommend you do is, or the way that I would recommend you approach it is as follows. Given that you're not going to be able to give your full attention to anything you're listening to whilst you're driving, the best thing to do is to combine your driving time with a period of more focused study at home and recycle the material. Okay? So the way that I'm thinking about this is that, let's say that at home you spend half an hour studying something in an intensive way where you're looking at it in detail. So you're kind of priming your brain with some of the information that's in there. Maybe you learn some grammar points or learn some vocabulary. And then when you get in the car and drive for an hour, you can listen to that same thing and it will just help to consolidate it. So I think what I would probably suggest, I'm going to give you something very specific here because it's really the only thing that comes to mind that I think would be a kind of profitable use of the time. And that is that given that you're a beginner, I would make sure you've got a textbook with a lot of dialogues in it. So take a standard teach yourself type textbook with 20 dialogues in there and get the dialogues on your iPhone or whatever, and then just play them one after the other on repeat in the car. All right, so you want to create an album with those 20 dialogues from the textbook and then just listen to them one after another on one huge cycle. This should be worthwhile because they're going to be at your level, so you should be able to, catch some useful information. But mostly because you're using that time to prepare yourself for stuff that you'll then go and study. So if you're studying these dialogues and these lessons, maybe in the morning, in a focused way, and then you're kind of listening to these dialogues then extensively in the car, then everything's going to reinforce itself. It won't be wasted time, right? So even though you're not going to be able to focus all your attention on these dialogues from the textbook in the car, if you've already studied it and you've already kind of picked apart some of the language while you're at home, then that time spent listening in the car will reinforce it, right? Because it's just so much easier for you it's within your reach. A lot of the vocabulary you will have studied, you will know. The grammar patterns you'll at least be aware of. And so that way you can kind of spend that listening time reinforcing the stuff that you've learned at home. That's exactly what I would do. And then when you get bored, which you will sooner or later, I would just go and get another textbook, another beginner's textbook. And the principles here are the same. You're finding something that is as close to your level as you can get. You're listening to it on repeat, because that's where the value comes, listening to it over and over again. And then when you're able, you then sit down and look at it in more detail. And then that whole process kind of goes on this endless loop. And I think that's the best way to use the time in the car. You could do like a Pimsleur or Michelle Thomas type program. It's worth it for a week or so, because you do learn some stuff, but not much. And I think given that you've got so much time, the real opportunity here is to spend all that time listening. And if you spend all that time listening to stuff which you can then later study and which is going to recycle itself, then I think you're onto something there. The only other thing, I guess, is as frustrating as it is, I think I would suggest not relying or not placing too much stock on that time in the car for study. It's all extra time that can be used to good effect, and it can be valuable and helpful, but the real learning, it has to be done when you're sat down in a focused way. All right, so use the time in the car to recycle stuff that you are doing in your own time when you're sat and concentrating. All right, so I hope that's helpful, Ron. Let me know how it goes. You can leave a comment on the show notes. iwillteachyoualanguage.com/episode 261. If anyone else has any tips for studying in the car, I'd love to hear them. It's not something I've done much of. When I was living in Qatar, I used to drive to work every day, but it was only like 10 minutes. So all I could really do was, that's what I did. I had my textbook dialogues on repeat, but it was only 10 minutes. So, to be honest, I'm not sure if you can stand it for an hour. But I think you've just got to stick to principles here, stick to what works, and see how it goes. All right, then, if you'd like to ask me a question, just like Ron did, then you can go to iwillteachyoualanguage.com/ask. And at the end of every episode, I like to leave you with a resource of some kind on the topic of the show. To be honest, I've been thinking, something I've been wanting to write up for a while is about this whole thing of this whole look at the cycle. What I was talking about in this episode, about using a focused time to get some detail and then prime your brain, and then go off and spend some more extensive time just letting it go round and round and round. Because this kind of recycling, again, between listening and reading, I'm finding more and more at the moment in my learning to be the most powerful thing of all. But it's not ready yet. It's on my list of things to write about. So I will mention it here when it's ready. And I'll probably make a bit of a fuss about it, because it's how I'm learning Japanese at the moment, and it's being super effective. So I'm going to talk a lot more about this in the coming weeks and months. So hopefully, whenever it does come out, it's going to be helpful to you. All right. Thank you, Ron, for your question. Thank you for listening, and see you back in the next episode of the podcast.
Thanks for listening to today's episode, and in case you didn't already know, I teach languages in a rather unusual way, through stories. Now, stories are a great way to learn a new language, because when you're engrossed in a story, you remember things more easily, and the mechanics of the language just start clicking inside your brain. It's quite something, and if you'd like to find out how you can learn a new language or improve your skills in a language that you already know, and do it with the power of stories, then you should check out my free Story Learning Kit, which will teach you exactly how this method works and how you can use it yourself to learn a new language. Visit storylearning.com/podkit, that's PODKIT, to get free access. Inside, you'll find explanatory videos, masterclasses, worksheets, short stories to practice with, and much, much more. Once again, that is storylearning.com/podkit, PODKIT. And if you're lucky, you might also find a link in the podcast description or show notes of this episode.